Assalamu alaikum and welcome to a mindful Ramadan. We are all tempted on a daily basis, whether that is the temptation to yell and scream at our family members to get things off our chest, whether that's about the temptation to lie and to be able to get things that we want. It could be the temptation for some people to look at inappropriate things or have inappropriate relationships. We are faced with these temptations. And there are individuals who succumb to every temptation they're faced with. They just fall and they're just become weak and they don't know how to control those temptations. Then there are others who are faced with temptation time and time again. And with each temptation, they're able to withstand. With each temptation, they become stronger and stronger. We want to find out what it takes for us to be able to withstand those temptations, what it will take for us to be stronger, because at the end, we have to resist so many temptations. We have to have the delayed gratification in order to succeed, not only in this dunya, but in the akhirah, inshallah. And today I have, mashallah, a dear friend and Ustada Taimiyyah Zubair, who is going to discuss this with us. Mashallah, Ustada Taimiyyah has studied under her parents and scholars, Dr. Idris Zubair and Dr. Farhad Hashimi, who had the pleasure to meet, mashallah. And they are the founders of Al-Huda International. She has been a student and a teacher at Al-Huda Institute and, mashallah, teaching Arabic, grammar, hadith, fiqh. And she's currently you're completing your humanities degree with the President's Entrance Scholarship at the University of Waterloo. Mashallah, it is such a pleasure and honor to have you here today. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Jazakumullah khairan kathira for having me with you today. I'm really looking forward to today's topic. I think it's so important for us to reflect on what Ramadan, and its worship really teaches us so that we can take those lessons and practice them throughout the rest of the year, inshallah.
Absolutely. And many times the focus becomes on the rituals, on the worship, and we really need to have that link to our character. And that's why the focus of this whole series is about taking all the beautiful rituals that we have been doing, we're accustomed to doing, but making sure that they are refining us and making us have the beautiful example of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Absolutely. When it comes to the reason why we have been asked to do so many things, it's not that these rituals are in and of themselves the focus every single time. These rituals or the different types of worship that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us to do, they are a goal and also a means to a greater goal. So the point is not to, make us do certain exercises, but to derive certain benefits through those, worship rituals so that they can extend over to the rest of our lives as well.
Absolutely. And those are the fruits of our worship, right? So if we don't get that, then we're just checking things off the list and not really benefiting from it. So inshallah that we can focus on that. Before we get started on this discussion, I'd like to see, how is it that you have been able to control those, let's say, whether it's the temptations, is it because of the upbringing? Some people may say it's because you had the privilege of, mashallah, having two scholars raise you. And what was that experience like and how did it shape who you are today?
I think every single person is on a journey. Every person has their own journey. And I would never, ever claim or say that I am perfect or that I have a great deal of self-restraint. That's not the case. Every person struggles. All of us are, weak humans who have their own weaknesses and deficiencies. Yeah. And, while it's good to, recognize different factors that can help us practice self-restraint, I think it's also unhealthy to compare ourselves to other individuals and, say things like, oh, it's so easy for them, or it's so easy for me, it's so hard for me. It's what we need to do is focus on the lessons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us, because those lessons are relevant to all of us, regardless of our circumstances. And, comparing ourselves to other individuals can make us feel that, we are better or we are less than them. And both of these are very unhealthy for us.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And actually, from a psychological perspective, that is very demotivating. you may get discouraged because you're not doing as much as the other person. This happens a lot in Ramadan, especially. You may feel like you're not doing as much as others. And it is, I always like to look at myself as competing against myself, right?
Exactly.
Against what I was able to do, maybe being at least a little bit better than yesterday or a little bit better than last year. And so that's a healthy reminder. Jazakallah khairan. So as far as developing this ability to have some self-restraint, and as we're faced with these temptations, what is it that we need to do in order to be more mindful and cognizant?
So when it comes to fasting, we learn in the Quran that the reason or the purpose of fasting is not to, make us hungry or to just make us deprive ourselves of worldly or human pleasures. That's not the goal. The goal is something greater. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Baqarah, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, that يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. That fasting has been prescribed on you, O you who believe, just as it was prescribed on the people before you. Why? لعلكم تتقون, in order that you may save yourselves, in order that you may protect yourselves and that you may become righteous. Right? So we have been taught very clearly that there is a purpose behind fasting, right? And that purpose, that goal is to save ourselves or to develop taqwa, right? And the word that is used here, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, this literally, ittaqa is to really try hard to protect oneself. And it is to exert, a great deal of effort to protect oneself, to shield oneself. And ittaqa is also when a person puts a barrier or a shield between themselves and, what is dangerous to them. So, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ means that fasting is so that we save ourselves, we protect ourselves. And this has been interpreted in a number of ways. One interpretation is that you save yourselves. How? Because fasting is going to be a means of forgiveness for you, and that will ultimately save you from the punishment of the sins that you've been committing. If you think about it, when we pray salah, we can be done within five minutes, maximum 7-8 minutes, right? But when it comes to fasting, you're fasting the entire day. It's a very long worship, you could say, right? And you're fasting for the entire month of Ramadan. So because you're spending so much time in worship, this is going to be a means of purification for you, which will ultimately save you and protect you, right? And then another interpretation of لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ is that in order that you may save yourselves, meaning from falling into sin. Because while we're fasting, we're constantly practicing self-restraint, right? We're constantly disciplining ourselves, saying no to ourselves, right? We're not allowing ourselves to do the things that we normally do. And this, first of all, shows us that we have the power to stay away from certain things. Because in general, we keep giving excuses to ourselves that, it's too hard, I can't do it, this is not for me, right? But fasting proves to you that you're stronger than you think. You have the ability to stay away from certain things. If you can avoid your coffee, your tea, your water, your food, etc., you can definitely stay away from other things as well. So
it is setting that point of reference where if you can withstand all of these things, then it gives you the strength to withstand many of the smaller tests that we face. And
exactly.
something else that you said is, as far as having mindfulness is so critical, because many people live on autopilot. They're just going through the motions and they don't self-regulate. They don't think about what they're saying, what they're doing. And what fasting does is that it makes you be very hyper vigilant. And that is what is needed to have the taqwa, is that vigilance of everything that you say and do.
Exactly. And how many times do you remind yourself that I cannot eat this, I cannot drink this while you're fasting, right? Because generally we are constantly grazing. We take a sip of water here, go grab something from there. We're constantly eating, drinking. Food is so accessible to us. But when you're fasting, you're constantly reminding yourself, I can't, right? I will not do this. I will not drink this. So that constant, vigilance, basically, it helps you develop a greater level of self-control and also a greater level of awareness and mindfulness,
right?
Where you become more attentive to your responses.
Right.
and also to what you are consuming, right? What you're taking in, what you are exposing yourself to. So definitely it increases, your level of mindfulness.
Right, right. And I think what people don't realize is that how this mindfulness can improve every aspect of their relationships, whether it's with Allah, whether it's in prayer, whether it's even in interacting with others. Because if you're truly present with the ones you love, your relationship is going to enhance. So this is a beautiful training, not just in withstanding the temptations, but to be more vigilant. So
Exactly. And, when it comes to sin, the ulama described that sin is basically of two types, right? One type of sin is that a person does what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden. So, for example, we've been told that backbiting is something unlawful, like we should not be doing it. But how often do we fall into, situations where we are backbiting, or we are saying things that are clearly inappropriate? But then another form of sin is that a person does not do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded, right? That the things that we're supposed to do, like for example, salah, right? Then sin would be that a person refuses to do that. And fasting basically it shows us that we are able to stay away from certain things and we are able to do certain things. For example, for many people, waking up early for Fajr is extremely difficult. It's a constant struggle. But in Ramadan, they're able to wake up for suhoor, right? And also what happens in Ramadan is that, you're fasting, so you kind of feel bad about skipping prayers, right? You may not have recited Quran for a very long time, but then when you're fasting, it's the month of Ramadan, you're kind of encouraged to, recite more Quran. So the month of fasting really, takes us to a higher level. Right. So fasting becomes a source of motivation and also a source of restraint.
that's a beautiful combination. So you're motivated, but it's also this idea of holding back. And that holding back during this month just gives us the strength to do so much during the year. MashaAllah.
And, when it comes to the diseases of the heart or the things that corrupt the heart, because if you think about it, our relationships, whether it is our relationship with ourselves or with our family or with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the way that we think about other people, this is deeply related to the state of our heart, right? And the things that corrupt the heart, some ulama, they say that all of those diseases or all of those corruptors of the heart can be boiled down to four things. And these are arrogance, secondly, hasad, jealousy, thirdly, ghadab, anger, and fourth, shahwa, desire. Right? And if you think about it, fasting, it basically weakens all of these things. How that fasting, first of all, it humbles you, right? That it breaks your ego, right? That each person has their own way of living, own way of talking, own way of dealing with other people. But fasting, especially when it's for a whole month, it really disrupts your life. Right? You cannot continue as you are. It really changes your life. Where your sleep cycle is affected, your eating habits are affected. So many things about how you live immediately get impacted because of the whole month of fasting. Right? So it really humbles you. Secondly, we see that fasting also produces gratitude, right? When you have that water at the end of the day, you're so grateful, right? And so it also counters jealousy. It weakens that feeling of jealousy, that I don't need to be jealous when you recognize the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. And then when it comes to anger also, we typically get angry because we feel insulted. We feel that people are not respecting us. But while you're fasting, you're so occupied with, just surviving the day or getting your work done while you're fasting, that you don't really have time to, or the bandwidth to pay attention to, unnecessary things. And then fasting also inhibits, it breaks desire also. So really, it is a cure for the diseases of the heart. And fasting is also something that makes us spiritually stronger.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love the spirituality that we feel when we give it, I think, our true attention, because as you said, all of these things are a result of fasting. But don't you think that it's the missing link is having that the attention, the mindfulness, making sure that, let's say, when you are fasting, you're not getting angry, because there are, individuals who will fast but then still get angry, maybe at their kids or at their spouse, or they
That's
may
true.
overreact, and I
Mhm.
feel that maybe they're not getting the fruits of it. So
Mhm.
if we can be more vigilant this Ramadan, that we want to get, and I look at it as, let's say, as a student wanting to get a grade on, if you have a research paper and you're aiming to do your best, and every little thing that you do is kind of like points being taken off, not to become too stressed out about it, but realizing that when you lose your temper with your spouse or at your kids because you're trying to focus on reading the Quran, it kind of defeats the purpose of your reading of the Quran, right? So just being aware of, like, I want to get the maximum grade for this day of fast. So I'm going to be more pleasant. I'm going to overlook when I'm interrupted 10 times while I'm reciting, and having a little bit more of that,
Mhm.
the patience that goes along with it.
Yeah, and the marks that you're mentioning, it reminds me of, how when you're submitting an essay, you have to be so vigilant, so careful about how you have done your citations,
Mm-hmm.
where the comma is, and
Right.
where the period is, and where you put the date, etc. You have to pay so much attention to detail just to get those full marks. And
Mm-hmm.
if you become sloppy over there, you know that this is going to affect your final grade.
Yes.
So this is what fasting does in a way that it trains us to be more attentive.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and I want to mention a few things which can really help
Sure.
us, inshallah, develop taqwa through fasting in Ramadan,
Inshallah.
inshallah. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is sincerity. We learn in the Quran about how the person who has taqwa is the person who is sincere.
Mm.
Because you see, taqwa is about being conscious.
Right.
And the height of consciousness is that you are doing what you're doing purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's very important to remind ourselves while we're fasting that we're doing this for Allah, right? We're not doing this to please our, family, or to remind them that, hey, I'm fasting, so I'm the best, or, I'm fasting, so be good to me, etc. Sincerity, by reminding ourselves that we are doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it makes us more conscious, and
Sure.
it makes us pay more attention to the way that we are fasting,
Mm-hmm.
because you remind yourself, Allah is watching me.
Sure. What is the litmus test, in your opinion, for that sincerity? How can someone check their level of sincerity?
I think it's it's best to focus on making ourselves more sincere instead of always focusing on, am I sincere or not, checking yourself for sincerity, because really you can't look into your heart, you can't see any tangible evidence of that sincerity, right, in
Mm-hmm.
your heart. But what you can do is, instead of judging yourself constantly, what you can do is strive to be more sincere. So consciously reminding yourself that this is for Allah, right? I'm doing this for Allah, and talk to Allah, in your dua, or, as you're going about your day, that, Ya Allah, I wouldn't stay hungry for anyone but you. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't do this for anyone but you. So consciously remind yourself, right? And another thing is that, sincerity is what, that you are, you're doing what you're doing because you're expecting reward from Allah,
Mm-hmm.
not from people,
Right.
right? So this is something that we can remind ourselves of throughout the day, that I don't expect anything from people. And this looks like, for example, you come home and, people are expecting you to help out around the house instead of taking a nap,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
That's a
that might,
common complaint. That's true.
right, that might be a little hard, that,
Mhm.
I was expecting to take a 2 hour long nap, and now I'm expected to help people around the house.
Mhm.
So, you remind yourself there that, look, I'm not fasting to get them to do everything, or to get them to allow me to rest and sleep. No, I'm doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't need people to, you know, to, um, do everything for me, and treat me as if I'm the best person ever. I'm doing the best thing ever. So sometimes you get support from people and sometimes you don't.
Right.
So the times when you don't get support from people is when you remind yourself, I'm not doing this to get their support anyway. I'm doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes.
Right?
That is such an important reminder to lower our expectations, because it is through expectations that suffering occurs. We have certain expectation of our spouse, of our children, of the people around us. And when they don't meet that expectation, that's when we feel underappreciated. We feel frustrated. So maybe that's one of the things that we can walk away from this talk, is that lower your expectation and only expect the best from Allah. And I think that will definitely realign our priorities, inshallah.
And as a woman, sometimes I do feel like, as mothers, as wives, sometimes we have to work really hard in Ramadan, right? Because on the one hand, we're fasting, and then on the other hand, we also want to, serve the best food to our families, and be there for them. And this can be extremely hard, extremely difficult. And I'm not saying that we should be spending a whole lot of time in the kitchen, but no matter how much you try to reduce that, it happens anyway.
Sure.
Right? Because we all have to eat, right? So at that time, we can remind ourselves of, this is what I do, that feeding people is also extremely rewardable.
Yes.
Right? This is also a form of worship. And sometimes you prepare food and, there's no acknowledgement from the family, or the gratitude is not, proportionate to the amount of effort that you've put in.
Sure. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you expect that, okay, after dinner, maybe people will stick around and they will, clean up the kitchen. I won't have to do anything.
Right.
But it doesn't work like that. Right. Always. So those are times when we also have to remind ourselves that, hey, if I prepared all this food and I've fed my family, this was for the sake of Allah. I want reward from Allah.
That's a beautiful reminder. And also the fact that interacting with your family members is a worship. I think that many people overlook that. How you smile. Smiling is charity. And how often do you smile at your children? How often do you smile at your spouse or your parents? And just having that sense of gentleness. The Prophet ﷺ was told that if he was not gentle with the people, they would have run away. So let's have some of that gentleness. And even when we're tired and exhausted and underappreciated, if we can maintain that level of beautiful character, that would earn, I think, so much more reward than maybe doing just 2 extra pages of the Quran, right? Because we are focusing on our interaction with our family members.
Mm-hmm. And, this doesn't mean that you have to suffer. You have to be the martyr of the family. No. Right. You can communicate your concerns with them, right? But it doesn't have to be in an angry way.
Right. Engage them. I think engaging the family and telling them that, guys, I really need help. Let's do this together. Making it fun rather than a demand or getting upset. I feel people are much more responsive.
Exactly. And also remind them that, when they participate in the housework or in preparing the food or in buying the food and, in taking the food over to, different friends and family, et cetera, if you're sharing with them, if you remind them that when they participate in this, they're also earning more reward, inshallah, then they will be encouraged. But if you just tell them that you have to do it because I'm asking you to, I'm your mom, you better listen to me, then, it's not going to be pretty.
They're going to do it grudgingly, and you want them to do it in a way that they earn the reward as well. So doing it with an open heart.
Exactly. Another thing I wanted to touch upon is that, through worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we also develop taqwa, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that, O mankind, worship your Lord who has created you. Why? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Worship him in order that you may save yourselves, in order that you may guard yourselves, you may become more mindful, more conscious. And when it comes to worship, the different acts of worship that we perform, they are also a means of adopting or increasing in our taqwa. So in the month of Ramadan, yes, we're fasting, but we should also pay attention to other forms of worship, because the more time you spend in worship, the more you are connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more conscious you are. You're feeding your soul, right? And this is something that's going to strengthen you, increase you in taqwa. Be more attentive toward your salah, This also includes reciting more Quran, giving more charity, spending from what we love. And the Prophet ﷺ was extremely generous in the month of Ramadan. This is something that's well known. So we shouldn't just be focused on ourselves. What are we going to eat today? And what are we going to wear on Eid? Yes, that's important, but we should also make sure that we are spending in charity, because that is also a form of worship. And the Prophet ﷺ was extremely generous in the month of Ramadan. So paying attention to different forms of worship, this is also a way of increasing in taqwa.
Excellent, excellent. So being more aware of the worship that we're doing, increasing the worship. And what I like to look at it as an analogy is that, let's imagine that you're in the middle of an ocean and you're all by yourself and it's just cold water and there's sea creatures and all you have is the rope of Allah. What would you do? You would like hold on, grasp to it, right? And the fiber of that rope is made out of the worship that we do. So the more worship that we do, the stronger that rope gets, so that when the tsunamis of life hit, then you don't hit rock bottom. And our concept of worship is so expansive in Islam that whatever we do, this rope gets thicker and thicker. So I think having a visualization like that, with each act of kindness, each act that we do, our rope to Allah is strengthened, then that helps us to want to keep working on it.
Absolutely. And the last thing I want to talk about is spend more time with the Quran. Right? In the month of Ramadan, if you want to increase in your taqwa, if you want to benefit from the month of fasting, then you also have to spend time with the Quran. And there are so many things mentioned in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that show us that the month of Ramadan is not just for fasting. The month of Ramadan is also the month of the Quran. The month of Ramadan is the month in which the Quran was revealed, and the Prophet ﷺ would review the Quran with Jibreel in the month of Ramadan every single night. And we have also been encouraged to perform Qiyamul Layl in the month of Ramadan in the night. And in the Qiyamul Layl, we're supposed to recite Quran, or if we're praying in Jama'ah, listen to the Quran. Spending more time with the Quran also is a means of increasing in taqwa, right? Because when you're reciting the Quran, you have less time to argue. Right? When you recite Quran while you're fasting, especially, then you're thirsty, your mouth is tired, you get sleepy. You're not going to be able to spend a lot of time, gossiping, or your eyes will be tired, your head will be hurting if you have recited a whole lot of Quran, and you will not be able to, watch TV, etc. for hours, for long. Definitely, reciting more Quran will protect you from a lot of unnecessary things or things that lead you to, making mistakes.
Right. It's like reprioritizing whatever is important to you. So when the Quran becomes your priority, you find it fuels you. And subhanAllah, you're not getting much sleep, you're not eating, you're spending your time prayer and Quran, but you feel so spiritually ascended and you feel light and you feel peaceful. So it's amazing what it does, that connection with the Quran.
Yeah. And another thing is that part of spending time with the Quran is to also reflect upon its meanings. So make it a point to either listen to something or read something to help you learn the teachings of the Quran as well, or at least be reminded of the teachings of the Quran. Because, there are things that we know. For example, we know that we should not be yelling at our families. We know that we should be speaking more kindly to them. Right. We know that we should be forgiving. We know that we should not be backbiting. These are things that we know. But a lot of times we don't realize the seriousness of backbiting. Even though we know how terrible it is, how big of a sin it is, we lack the motivation, right, to stay away from it. When you get reminded of the verses of the Quran, when you get reminded of the messages of the Quran, that makes you more conscious, more aware. It makes you more eager to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
It sure does. It does. And I like the fact that you reminded everyone to read the meaning, because sometimes the focus becomes in completion, reading the Quran, which is very beneficial, very good for our heart, and we earn the reward. But sometimes if someone is not an Arab speaking, or even some Arab speakers will not understand the meaning. And if you don't understand the meaning, then you don't get the complete effect of the Quran. So it's nice to balance that out.
Yeah. And you can, set a goal for yourself that I'm going to read the meaning of at least one page And if not possible, then, there's books available, read something, but definitely connect with the meaning of the Quran as well.
Sure. It makes a big difference. So
Absolutely.
were there other reminders as far as how we can withstand temptations? Because I think this is what really people struggle with. I do counseling on a daily basis, and I see people that really struggle with this, whether it's an addiction, whether it has to do with not being able to hold their temper or control their anger, and they just succumb. What would you advise a person that is struggling with these kind of tests?
A very important thing is that be kind to yourself. Recognize that you are human, you are struggling, and yes, you need to improve, and you are trying, and you are striving to be better every day. And when you do succumb, then be forgiving to yourself, in the sense that be encouraging to yourself. Don't cancel yourself. Don't label yourself as a failure, because Ramadan is supposed to be an opportunity for all of us, regardless of who we are, what our weaknesses are. And the month of Ramadan is filled with so many blessings, and it's really an opportunity to earn forgiveness. Right? In a hadith, we learn that whoever fasts in the month of Ramadan with faith and expectation of reward, then all of their previous sins will be forgiven. Whoever prays in the nights of Ramadan, right, with faith and expectation of reward, their previous sins will be forgiven. Acknowledge your struggles, recognize the places that you need to work on, the things that you need to improve in yourself, and then use Ramadan as a means to become a better version of yourself. Make dua, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you, to strengthen you, and use these tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to become a better person. And fast in the best way possible, connect more with the Quran, and fill your time with worship, because when we pay attention to our spiritual needs, only then can we be stronger individuals. And the month of Ramadan is really a time where we are paying more attention to our spiritual needs than our physical needs, because that does get deprived over the year. So this is where we focus on the soul.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message of hope and optimism, and the idea of not beating yourself up because you're making mistakes, and forgive yourself, be gentle with yourself. And it is a time of creating congruence between our beliefs and our actions, because that's when we're psychologically most healthy, and spiritually we thrive when we're feeding that part of our soul. This was very beneficial. May Allah reward you for the reminders, with having a bit more of a vigilance this Ramadan with their behavior, and be more upright, inshallah. It was such beneficial information. And what new projects are you working on right now?
I just completed a class with Al Maghrib. So
what
inshallah,
class is it? What is it called?
It's called I Am Her.
Okay.
And
what is it
yes,
about?
it's basically about stories of women from the Quran.
MashaAllah.
Yeah.
We need the representations. I think learning from female scholars makes a big difference, because there's this ability to relate and identify, and we benefit greatly from the male speakers. I think sometimes we need that female perspective, for sure.
I agree with that.
Yeah, mashallah. Jazakallah khairan.
Thank you so much for having me. Barakallahu feekum.
Pleasure.